be like, do you have any pre-existing conditions that I need to know about? I demand to know why this book is not considered required reading in schools. Hello and welcome to my BookTube channel, Jack and the Book Stack, where I talk about a wide variety of book genres and the bookish lifestyle. And in this weekly reading vlog, you are going to see what I mean by the bookish lifestyle, because this week I want to focus on nonfiction books for Nonfiction November. These are 3 of the books that I have planned this week, but I'm really just gonna go with the flow, and I have like a couple on my Kindle or some audiobook options. I can really change things up depending on what I want to learn about this week. The only one that is a high priority must read is this one right here. This is called Thinking Fast and Slow. It is about the subconscious factors that influence our decision making. And this is on this list as a priority because it's been on my TBR for the longest. Out of all the books on my want to read shelf on GoodReads, if I sort by date added, this one has been there the longest. So I really need to knock it out. So this is a priority, but everything else I'm just gonna go with my mood. What's awesome about Nonfiction November is it really focuses on nonfiction. Duh, it's kind of like right there in the title. I think a lot of people have this preconceived notion that nonfiction is really boring. And that's true if it's something that you're not interested in. But there is such a wide range of topics, and there have been a lot of nonfictions that have caught my interest as of late. So I'm going to try and check some of them out, and I will tell you about them as we go through it and just share what I'm getting up to this week. So without further ado, let's start Nonfiction November. It's Monday now, and I had some killer progress on my Nonfiction November TBR list. First and foremost, by completing Thinking Fast and Slow. This made it onto my TBR way back in 2018 because of my interest in social sciences. And this is about our subconscious biases that influence our decision making. Now that I've completed it, I think I would describe this as relevant and very, very informative. The big takeaway I had from this book is how easily we're all manipulated, myself included. I identified a lot of behavior in myself as well as just humankind that was just so relevant to everyday life. It was very, very alarming. On page 53, they cite another experiment that is one that really alarmed me for how easily I am probably manipulated in everyday life and not even realizing it. So it says here that in an experiment that became an instant classic, the psychologist John Bargh and his collaborators asked students at New York University, most aged between 18 and 22, to assemble 4-word sentences from a set of 5 words. For example, he finds it yellowed instantly. For one group of students, half the scrambled sentences contained words associated with the elderly, such as Florida, forgetful, bald, gray, or wrinkle. When they had completed the task, the young participants were sent out to do another experiment in an office down the hall. That short walk was what the experiment was really about. The researchers unobtrusively measured the time it took for people to get from one end of the corridor to the other. As Bargh had predicted, the young people who had fashioned sentences from words with an elderly theme walked down the hallway significantly more slowly than the others. The Florida effect involves 2 stages of priming. First, a set of words primes thoughts of old age, though the word old is never mentioned. Second, these thoughts prime a behavior, walking slowly, which is associated with old age. All this happens without any awareness. When there were questions afterward, none of the students reported noticing that the words had a common theme, and they all insisted that nothing they did after the first experiment could have been influenced by the words they had encountered. They had no idea. They had no idea that this thought was put into their head and then influenced their activity or their decisions. That is wild to me. Imagine how marketers use that to get us to buy their products. There was a lot of information in this book. I'm not kidding when I call it informative. And if I were annotating it, I would probably highlight something on every single page. There was so much. Therefore, it's going to be really hard to retain all this information or remember it exactly as these situations present themselves in my everyday life, but it was still really worth the read. I'm so glad that I read it, and probably it would be good to annotate and then come back to and only read the annotations because there's just so much relevant information here. I demand to know why this book is not considered required reading in schools. I'm talking about Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. This is one that I knew I was going to read this week, and when I was reading Thinking Fast and Slow, I felt myself wondering when they're talking about these different experiments if it was heavily leaning towards the male gender for all the participants or if females were equally represented. And so I went into this, I picked this up because of the title, and I do have an interest in gender studies. I took a lot of classes in college about it. It's something that has always stood out to me, and I love learning more about. So it was really the title and that interest that made me put this on my TBR, and I picked it up next because it was in the back of my mind while I was reading that other book. This book is really about how the male experience is considered the norm and the female experience is considered more of a niche, and how that shows up in different elements of life, I guess. So looking at the chapter headings, what you can expect in this book are chapters of daily life, the workplace, design, which was the most interesting chapter I think I read, or the most interesting part. I'll tell you more in a second. Going to the doctor, public life, and when it goes wrong. The book kicks off talking about how women are usually responsible for most of the household and caregiving duties and the impact that has on everyday life. Obviously career, I think we hear about that a lot and how it kind of hinders career advancement, but something on page 72 really, really shocked me. So it says a Finnish study found that single women recover better from heart attacks than married women, particularly when put alongside a University of Michigan study, which found that husbands create an extra 7 hours of housework a week for women. An Australian study similarly found that housework time is most equal by gender for single men and women. So like single men and women equal. When women start to cohabit, their housework time goes up while men's goes down, regardless of their employment status. What? What? This blew my mind. This is unreal that single women recover faster from heart attacks because they're just taking care of themselves. Oh my gosh. On page 186, we are in that section of design that I said I wanted to come back to. And this is one of the biggest takeaways I had from the book. So men are more likely than women to be involved in a car crash, which means they dominate the numbers of those seriously injured in car accidents. But when a woman is involved in a car crash, she is 47% more likely to be seriously injured than a man, and 71% more likely to be moderately injured, even when researchers control for factors such as height, weight, seatbelt usage, and crash intensity. She is also 17% more likely to die. And it's all to do with how the car is designed and for whom. This section about using crash test dummies that more likely represent the male body than the female. Like, how is this happening? How is this a thing? How do we not take our differences into account? They're talking about how women have like different length legs, different bone density, different things taken into consideration but not tested for. It made me so angry. This book just made me so angry for all the things we are neglecting. Last night, I also finished my read of Spy the Lie, which I checked out from Kindle Unlimited. And it's worth mentioning that I saw Thinking Fast and Slow is also available on KU if you wanted to check this one out. This one, kind of self-explanatory. It talks about how to spy that moment when someone is lying to you. There's lots of different tells that people have or different things they say that could identify it. But this book definitely calls out that there is no rock solid formula for identifying a lie. Because, one thing I thought of, if someone's closed off, like crossing their arms, it means they're like holding something back. And this book clearly calls out, well, that could be the case, but they could also be cold. They could be uncomfortable. That's just how they like to sit. It's hard to guarantee anything. So it's kind of focusing on, you want to find a combination of things. And one thing that stuck out to me was really interesting is that if you ask someone what they think the punishment should be for the guilty party of this crime that maybe you suspect them of, that the guilty party will often recommend a lighter sentence than someone who is innocent. So if you have 2 kids and your favorite vase is broken on the floor and you want to know which one of them did it, you would ask each one individually and separately, what do you think the punishment should be for the one who broke it? The one who actually broke it might say like, oh, they should just lose TV privileges for the night, whereas the innocent one will have a much more severe proposition, like they should lose Wi-Fi and movies and they should eat dinner in their rooms, something like that. So I thought that was really interesting. They related this a lot to everyday life in addition to like interrogating criminals, which I thought was a good range to keep me interested. And then at the end, after they tell you about how to ask questions and different tells to look for, they give you a list of potential questions that you could ask, like a possible nanny, talk to your kids about drugs and alcohol usage, confront a partner about potential infidelity. So I thought that was really cool how they link that to the reader's everyday life. So this was also a great read this weekend. Next on my list, I think I'm going to be reading Unwell Women. This is about misdiagnosis and myth in a man-made world. Again, kind of focusing on that gender studies, but also in Invisible Women, there was a chapter on medical differences, and that's something I'm really curious to learn more about, especially because my mom had a heart attack in February of this year, and through that experience I learned that heart attacks present themselves differently in women than they do in men. And so a lot of times a woman won't even know she's having a heart attack, or she gets sent home from urgent care or the emergency room. And it's something that, like, I cannot believe this isn't highlighted. We all know the symptoms, or like what a heart attack looks like on TV, but that's usually represented as like the male symptoms. So this is something like the medical field in general and gender differences is something that I am very, very curious about, and I already have it in my mind from Invisible Women, so that's why I'm going to pick up Unwell Women next. It's Thursday now, the end of my week of reading nonfiction books, so I want to tell you about the books that I read. So I read this quirky title called Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs and Other Questions About Dead Bodies. I picked this up purely because of the title, because it sounded really fun and lighthearted and delightfully morbid. I would describe this one as informative and entertaining. In fact, I think it would be a great audiobook because it does stay higher level, so it's easy to follow along with. It is very informative and like scientific, but it doesn't go into too much detail. In fact, all of these questions are submitted by children. So I like the explanation of why that is, because they're not so caught up in what is considered socially acceptable to ask. So I liked that kind of whimsical spin to it, but sometimes I felt the writing style felt like it was being written for a child. And I have an example for you on page 6. Here's a hypothetical situation. An astronaut, let's call her Dr. Lisa, is outside the space station puttering away on some routine repair. Do astronauts even putter? I assume everything they do has a specific, highly technical purpose, but do they ever spacewalk just to make sure everything looks tidy around the old station? All of a sudden, Lisa's puffy white spacesuit is struck by a tiny meteorite, ripping a sizable hole. So you can see how she kind of goes off on a little tangent there about puttering around the space station. There was a lot of that, so that's what I mean, like the writing style seemed like it was trying too hard to be cheeky sometimes, and I just wanted like, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. You'll notice that there's a little bookmark here marking a page, and that's because on page 130 there was something that I wanted to fact check with my dentist. I found out that one of my friends has tissue from a cadaver butt in her mouth. Turns out quite a few people do. When gums are receding due to teeth grinding or health issues, they can be rebuilt by implanting cells from the butt of a human cadaver. That was really interesting. I asked him about it, and after he and the dental hygienist stopped laughing at me, they said it's true that some material is sourced from cadavers, but he never asked them the location in which the cells are sourced from. So he said he will definitely be checking with his rep in the future to see if that fact is true. So I cannot confirm nor deny at this point. I think the one that disturbed me the most was the question, what happens if someone dies on a plane? So obviously if someone's in trouble, they will make an emergency landing, but if the person is already deceased, there's not much more they can do, right? So if that's a situation, if you're in the window seat and the middle seat kicks the bucket, there's nothing they can do. You just have to sit next to that corpse throughout the duration of the flight, which seriously gives me so much anxiety to think of that happening. So I think anytime I'm on a flight now, I'm gonna be like, do you have any pre-existing conditions that I need to know about? Because I don't wanna be stuck next to you. So that was a super quick read, very, very fun. Next, I listened to the audiobook for Laziness Does Not Exist. And that is one that I picked up because I feel like hustle culture is so big and gives us the impression that we always need to be doing something. And I love the pushback that I'm seeing recently on that kind of stuff. So that's why I wanted to pick up this book. There was a lot of great research in this book, and it kind of talks about how feeling unmotivated is not a reflection of your self-worth. We kind of have this toxic belief that everything could be made better if you just work harder, and it actually hurts charity efforts. Like if you look at the homeless population, the stigma is, well, if they would only stop being so lazy, then they wouldn't be poor, they wouldn't be homeless. You just have to work harder, which is a very privileged kind of perspective. This book talks about the negative impacts of frequent news watching and constantly being bombarded with heavy information that we feel powerless about. It also talked about pressure in our hobbies, and it did mention reading and that you always feel like you need to be reading a certain amount of books, which I think is something that we on BookTube, like consumers of BookTube, can be really conscious of, is that are we just trying to compete with each other to read more books? And I also really liked the section on the benefits of savoring the moment, savoring that book that you're reading, how it reduces depression. That was really motivating. And overall, I got a lot from this book. I'm actually ending this vlog a little bit early because I still have a couple chapters left of Unwell Women. I'm going to happy hour tonight, but I'll read those chapters when I get home. But I feel like I can talk about it now because I'm just about done and I'm not enjoying this. So it's easy to talk about. Firstly, it is very subjective. I think if you are looking for history of medicine and women's health, this is fantastic. Very, very, very well researched. It's just that we don't even get to present day medicine until after like the 75% mark. We're talking about like ancient Greece and all these things where, you know, I think it's so easy for readers to dismiss this. Like, this isn't relevant. This is ancient Greece when they thought every ailment a woman had was just solved by getting married and having babies, right? This isn't relevant. And it makes me sad because that's probably a population that could really benefit from information about misdiagnosis in women. And it's such an important topic. And this book delivered on what it promises. I looked at the GoodReads description and it does say that it's talking about the history of medicine and women. So it delivers, it executes on what it promises. It's just not what I was looking for. So I'm gonna rate this probably 3 stars because of that, because it's like my own expectations and what I was looking for. I just picked up the wrong book. If I'm correct, I think the final count for the number of nonfiction books that I read this week was 6 books, which is wild. Audiobooks definitely helped, and it helped that some of them were a little bit shorter, but what really helped is that they were mostly very, very interesting. They all talked about topics that I was interested in, which I think is the most important factor in picking out a nonfiction book for you. Invisible Women was the most impactful for me, the one I enjoyed the most, I got the most out of, and I have quoted this book, albeit very, very poorly, to several different people in my life already. I'm like pushing this book on people. I was talking to my dental hygienist about it. I was talking to my boyfriend. I was talking to my coworkers. So this one was definitely my favorite. This is the one that I wish was required reading in schools for men and women. It's fantastic. I can't say enough amazing things about it. But that was my week. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I'm gonna get going to happy hour, but happy reading to you, and I will see you in the next video.